Welcome to From Center Ice, the podcast. My name is Courtney, and this is a brand new podcast series called the From Center Ice Happy Hour. And the goal of this is basically just to be a podcast episode that will wind down our weeks. My goal is to get them out around 5 o'clock p.m. Central Time every Friday. And if your teams are in the playoffs, that's before the playoffs start, so you can ramp up to that night's action by tuning in with the happy hour, or you can listen to them later. Every once in a while, my cat might try to join in, as he wants to do now. He gets a little jealous if I'm talking to anybody that's not him, even if that's just a camera. But it is what it is. And for today's happy hour, I do not have a nice alcoholic beverage. I have an energy drink because I have an IceHogs playoff game to head off to after I record this. I'm going to try to record them on Thursday nights usually so I can make sure to get them out on Fridays. Yesterday that just didn't work out for me. So Friday afternoon it is, and energy drink it is for me. So that being said, the IceHogs are in the playoffs, but the main topic going around the Twitter hockey world this week is the NHL playoffs also started this week, and there's been some pretty good action, so let's just go through those series that have been going on so far. And first up, we've got the Carolina Hurricanes and the Boston Bruins. The Canes finished first in the Metro, and Boston finished fourth in the Atlantic, so they were in that wild card spot there. That series is currently 2-0 in favor of the Carolina Hurricanes, and they've been putting a pretty good beatdown on the Bruins so far. Game 1 was 5-1, and Game 2 was 5-2. So it's not looking too great for the Bruins. Of course, it's only 2 games. They can definitely come back from that. But Antti Raanta was injured. Frederik Andersen started the playoffs injured. And Carolina's still winning because they've got Pyotr Kochetkov in net. And he just keeps winning for the Canes. He's a 22-year-old goaltender. He was selected in the second round in 2019, and he played 3 games during the regular season, and he won all 3 of them. So it's looking good for him there, and in the playoffs so far, he's gone 1-0. He is getting the start again tonight for Carolina. Apparently, Antti Raanta could have played if they needed him to, but they want him to be able to rest up and kind of heal that that injury a bit more. Yes, Antti, heal your energy. My goodness, what is going on with that energy of yours? But no, they want him to heal up that injury, and we'll see how Kochetkov does in net once again. In the AHL this year with the Chicago Wolves, he was very good for them as well. If I look at my notes correctly here so I can give you the correct information, he played 15 games for the Chicago Wolves and went 13-1-2 with a .921 save percentage. So while the 2 main starting goaltenders for the Carolina Hurricanes may currently be out with not bad energy but injuries, they seem to be in pretty good hands in net with the 22-year-old rookie. So we'll see if he keeps on his winning ways or if he keeps taunting Brad Marchand. That was a thing that he did. It's a pretty bold move by the rookie there, but I know that fans around the NHL love to see it. I'm sure Carolina Hurricanes fans love to see it. It was pretty funny. They're only 2 games in, but you've already got the Hurricanes goalie taunting Marchand. So we'll see how that series plays out. Sorry about my voice. I went to the IceHogs game 1 on Wednesday night and did a little bit of screaming. So my voice might be rough as long as the IceHogs are still in the playoffs, but that is a sacrifice that I am willing to make because my team is in the playoffs. You understand if your team is also in the playoffs. And if they aren't, I'm sure you would also sacrifice your voice for your team to be in the playoffs. Trust me. I know how it goes. It's not always that this team has been in the playoffs, and it's been pretty sad for the Blackhawks as of late. But moving on, in the Eastern Conference, we've got the Florida Panthers, the President's Trophy winning Florida Panthers. Would you have called that going into this season? I know that they were playing better to end last year, and that first round series between them and Tampa Bay was probably one of the best playoff series we've had in a long time. But I wouldn't have guessed that Florida was going to win the President's Trophy. Let me know what you think about that. But obviously they were first in their division. And in the Atlantic, they are taking on the Washington Capitals, who were fourth in the Metro. And that series is tied 1-1. Game 1 was 4-2 in favor of the Washington Capitals, although it looked like Florida might take that one for a while. And then the Capitals happened, and they stormed back with some goals of their own. But Florida came back in game number 2, and they beat the Capitals 5-1. So they weren't messing around. They wanted to get that win. They couldn't get the comeback in game number 1, which has just been a crazy story for the Panthers so far this season. It seems like they can never just get the lead and win a game easily. They have to play from behind in order to be able to win games. It's very strange watching them. I didn't watch as many games as I wanted to of the Panthers this year, but the ones that I did tune in for, it seemed they always fell behind. But then in the third period, here they come storming back, and then the Panthers win. And obviously they did that plenty of times because they stole the President's Trophy from the Colorado Avalanche. And yes, I'm going to say that they stole the President's Trophy from the Colorado Avalanche because I think most people would have bet on Colorado winning it this season. My cat also agrees with me, and maybe it's a good thing for Colorado that they didn't win the President's Trophy, seeing as, there's a whole curse surrounding it, except, the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup after winning the President's Trophy, but that seems to not usually be the case, so maybe there's less pressure on Colorado this year, even though they are the big-time favorites. I don't know. We'll get to Colorado, but for now, the Florida Panthers and the Washington Capitals are tied 1-1. Then we've got a very dramatic series out east between the Pittsburgh Penguins and the New York Rangers. And could you imagine that there is goaltending drama in Pittsburgh? I know. Dramatic pauses for just pure shock and awe. I think that's something we all could have guessed would happen. It seems like there's always something going on with goaltending in Pittsburgh. Last year, Tristan Jarry was not very good in the playoffs at all. This year, he's injured going into the playoffs with a lower body injury. I saw that he was listed as day-to-day, and there was speculation it was a foot injury. I don't pay nearly enough attention to the Pittsburgh Penguins, so I don't know if that foot injury is confirmed or if it's just a rumor, but either way, he's injured to start the playoffs. So Casey DeSmith was in for game number 1, and he played very well, to give him credit. It looked a bit shaky here and there, and of course he's opposing Igor Shesterkin down at the other end, who is going to be a Vezina finalist for a very long time. He is just a great goaltender and the MVP of the Rangers. Enough can't be said about the guy. He's just a very good goaltender and still a very young goaltender. I don't know how the Rangers always seem to just get that one guy that can stick with them for a while and be an elite goalie, but they managed to figure it out, and they've gotten another one. Now that Lundqvist is retired, they've got Shesterkin. And it's not an easy task for the Penguins to have to go up against him, and it got even more tough because that first game did end up going to overtime. Again, pause for dramatic effect. A Pittsburgh Penguins game going to overtime. Totally shocked she said sarcastically. It was 3-3 heading into overtime, and it was not solved in the first overtime, so they went to a second overtime, and I believe it was less than halfway through the second overtime, Casey DeSmith just leaves the ice mysteriously. Watching the game, nobody knew what happened. There wasn't a hit or anything that I saw happen and that nobody on the broadcast saw happen in real time. Maybe looking back on it with replays after the game, you could see where he may have injured himself. But he leaves the ice. Everybody is beyond confused, especially Louis Domingue, who had to come in and play the rest of the second overtime and the third overtime. Because yes, it went to 3 overtimes, but Louis Domingue made 17 saves, got the win, and I mean, just Pittsburgh always just finds a way. They always find a way. Now, unfortunately for Penguins fans, they did end up losing game number 2. The Rangers came out and they didn't want to be embarrassed again, so they took game 2 5-2. And I must say, embarrassed, because if you go all that way through overtime, and getting to overtime isn't the embarrassing thing. Maybe you think so on a backup goaltender in Casey DeSmith, when typically Tristan Jarry would be the starter. But then having a goalie come in completely cold in second overtime, and he blanks you, and his team gets the win. I don't know. If I were the Rangers, I would feel pretty embarrassed by that. But that's kind of one of those hockey things, right? It's a game of bounces, a game of inches. Crazy things happen all of the time. So it's also not surprising, especially for the Penguins, who it seems like they can just throw any random guy they find on the street out onto the ice. And as long as they're playing with Crosby and Malkin healthy, then they're just going to win. Or even without Crosby and Malkin healthy, they're just going to win. I don't know what it is about Pittsburgh, but they do it. And they did it again in game number 1. They couldn't do it in game number 2, so that series is tied 1-1, and it's been a pretty exciting series so far. Of course, with scheduling in the NHL and the playoffs, you have to kind of pick and choose which series you're going to watch. And on those nights, I have been choosing to watch Pittsburgh and New York, and then Colorado and Nashville. I was blanking on who they were playing there for a second. I've been choosing to watch that one. They're on the same channel, so it's just easier to do it that way. So I haven't watched a whole lot of Florida and Washington. I've seen the highlights when they cut to the games in between periods, and I also haven't seen any of Calgary and Dallas, actually, because they're on at the same time as the Avs and the Preds, and of course that first night Pittsburgh went to all of those overtimes, so I didn't see much of that Avs game either. It's been interesting so far, but those aren't the only series going on. Oh, before I move on, looking down at my notes here, so Casey DeSmith, after leaving the game in second overtime, is apparently out for the playoffs now. I saw that notification pop up from The Athletic today while I was going through and making notes for this. So he is out for the entire playoffs. He had core muscle surgery. What happened during that first game to where he had to have core muscle surgery and he's out for the rest of the playoffs? So now, unless Tristan Jarry can come back, and again, I guess he's listed day to day, it's on Louis Domingue to just take over the net for Pittsburgh and try to beat the Rangers. Penguins, man. It wouldn't surprise me at all if they rode Louis Domingue to another Stanley Cup, because that would be the most Penguins thing to ever happen. It just really would. But with how happy and smiley Louis Domingue was after that game 1, it just warmed my goalie heart. So I was sad for him when he lost game number 2. I don't really have a rooting interest in this series. I'm just looking for some good hockey, and they've delivered that so far. The Rangers have been a pretty exciting team this year. I think their rebuild is going a lot faster than many people anticipated that it would. But when you have Artemi Panarin out there and Mika Zibanejad's killing it and Adam Fox and Igor Shesterkin, these guys are all still pretty young for the most part. They're going to be good for a while as long as they don't have to lose any guys due to, cap and that kind of thing. So the Rangers, they're exciting. I have no predictions for this series because they are going up against the mythical Pittsburgh Penguins, who just seem to do things when you don't think those things are possible. And I mean, going back to Igor Shesterkin, he made, I want to say, 79 saves in game 1 in the loss, which was second most all time in the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs since they started recording shots on goal in the 50s. It's just, imagine making that many saves and then your team loses to a third string goaltender. That's a lot. So for his sake, I am happy that the Rangers came back and won game number 2, because going down in a 2-game hole that would be a lot. I'm sure that Shesterkin would be able to just brush it off and bounce back. Again, it's hockey, but man, that would suck. But he, like I said, second most saves in the NHL playoffs since they started recording that data. The first place for making the most saves in the playoffs was Joonas Korpisalo in that 5 overtime game against the Tampa Bay Lightning back in 2020, and he made 85 saves and also lost. So maybe it's not the best to be the goaltender making the most saves in the game, which sounds silly because typically if your goalie is making the most saves, then you are going to win. But also that means that the other team is firing a lot of shots at your goaltender, and if shots are going toward the net, they are more likely to go in than shots going toward the other net. So, that's just rough. But we must move on because there are other series going on, and we move over to the Western Conference, where we have the Minnesota Wild, second place in the Central this year, taking on the St. Louis Blues, who were third in the Central, I want to say. And that series is also tied 1-1. Game 1, St. Louis came out and blanked Minnesota. They got a 4-0 win over the Wild. But in game number 2, Minnesota stormed back and won 6-2. So much like the Rangers, they wanted to come back, get a little redemption for their goaltender, Marc-Andre Fleury, former Blackhawk, which is still strange to say. That seems like a fever dream that Fleury ever played for the Blackhawks for the majority of the season until the trade deadline. So good for him. Hopefully he can get some more wins and get to the Western Conference Finals so the Blackhawks can get a first-round pick this year. That would be cool, because we currently don't have one because of the Seth Jones trade, where we sent Adam Boquist and 2 first-round picks to the Columbus Blue Jackets. So being able to recoup one of those first-round picks this year would be nice. And that would also mean we don't have to worry anymore about the Blackhawks giving up a first-round pick, because if they are in one of the lottery spots this year, then Columbus gets our first next year, and I would rather just not have to worry about it anymore. So let's hope the Blackhawks don't get a lottery spot and that we get that first round pick for the Fleury trade. But anyway, that series is tied 1-1. I haven't watched it because I've been watching other series, so we'll see how that one plays out. It's basically 2 teams that I never root for to win ever, playing each other, and one of them has to win. So hopefully it's the team that will end up giving my team a draft pick in this upcoming NHL entry draft this summer. Next up, we have the Edmonton Oilers, who were second in the Pacific, and the LA Kings, who were third in the Pacific. And there were a lot of questions going into this series. Would Edmonton finally be able to win another playoff series for and with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl? Would the LA Kings be able to win a game against the Edmonton Oilers? Would they be able to stop that crazy offense that the Oilers have, especially with that two-headed monster? And that series is tied. LA came out and they won the first game 4-3. That was a pretty intense game. I did end up watching that one, and it was a pretty good game, back and forth. But in game number 2, Edmonton decided to just completely dismantle the Kings, and they came out and won 6-0, with Mike Smith getting a shutout in the playoffs. And I'm glad I didn't watch that one, because if you've been around from center ice for any amount of time, you'll know that I am not a Mike Smith fan. It goes all the way back to 2012, and if you don't know what I'm talking about there, just know I'm a Blackhawks fan, and we don't talk about 2012 really in regards to Mike Smith and the then Phoenix Coyotes, but he did get a shutout in game number 2, so we'll see where that series goes. Currently tied. The funny thing is they scored 6 goals in that second game, but McDavid only had 2 points in that game, and they were 2 assists. So I wouldn't have guessed, just by looking at the score, 6-0, that McDavid wouldn't have gotten a goal in that game. I would assume, oh, he probably got a hat trick, and then Leon Draisaitl got a hat trick, and there you go, 6 goals. But nope. Only 2 assists, because hockey is funny and doesn't make any sense. But man, I didn't watch the second game, like I said, but I watched the first one, and Connor McDavid is just ridiculous at hockey. He just does things that shouldn't be possible, just cuts through defense like it's absolutely nothing. Ugh, the guy, he deserves better, but I can't root for that team while Mike Smith is in net, so we shall see what happens. We shall see. And then we have the Colorado Avalanche and the Nashville Predators. Of course, Colorado being first in the Central Division and the Predators being 5th in the Central Division. It didn't seem like this was ever going to be a great time for the Predators coming into this series, especially learning going into the playoffs that UC Saros was injured and going to miss time. So they started David Riddick in game number 1, and that went very poorly for them. Colorado won game 1 7-2. Now, they didn't keep Riddick in for the whole time. They ended up putting in Connor Ingram, who then started game number 2. But Colorado was up 3-0 within the first 10 minutes, and they were up 4-0 at the end of the first period. And it was just the Avalanche show. There were an avalanche of goals in that game, if you will. On the other side for Nashville, Matt Duchene, returning to Colorado, a former Colorado Avalanche, got the 2 goals for the Nashville Predators, because drama, and there must always be drama in the NHL, especially in the playoffs. Take a sip of my drink there, but yeah, game number 1, I was hoping for the same in game number 2, just completely see Nashville run over by the Avalanche, just show absolutely no mercy. But that wasn't the case, and game number 2 went to overtime, tied 1-1, which was madness, because Nathan MacKinnon scored within the first 5.5 minutes of game number 2. So it was looking like we were going to get something much like game number 1, where they just completely ran over them. But Yakov Trenin tied it up in the last 5 minutes of period number 1. So it was tied 1-1 heading into that first intermission. And it stayed 1-1 until they went to overtime. So it was kind of, sort of, a goalie battle. It was more so the Connor Ingram show because he was seeing a lot more action than Darcy Kemper down at the other end. I believe Nathan MacKinnon's first shot, or the Avalanche's first shot of the game, was MacKinnon's goal. And then Ingram went on to make 49 straight saves in that game until overtime. But his team could not get one past Darcy Kemper. The final shots on goal ended up being 51 to 26. 51 to 26. They basically doubled their shots on goal, and this game only ended 2-1. And that, wow. So Cale Makar, because obviously Cale Makar was always going to be a story, he got the overtime winner in game number 2. And it was really feeling like one of those games where Colorado would play so well like they did and get so many shots, so many scoring chances, but then Connor Ingram would play out of his mind, which he did, and then the game would end off of a total bullshit goal by Nashville that just like trickles into the net, and just complete anticlimactic way to end a game, except for Nashville because they would have been happy and celebrating had they won. But it was really feeling like one of those games because we see it so often. You're just like, how did this game end like this? And then Connor Ingram would have been a story forever, and he probably still will be for the effort he put in game number 2. But Cale Makar spoiled their fun, and he put home a goal in overtime to take the win 2-1 and put the Avs up 2-0 in their series against the Nashville Predators. It now heads back to Nashville. We'll see if the Preds can get a win there at home. If not, then the series is going to be over in just a couple days. And I don't know if Colorado wants the rest, really. That didn't go super well for them last year when they got the sweep. But we shall see. That game 1 was simultaneously exciting and boring, as I thought, and one of my friends who is an Avalanche fan said. And I don't really know how it was because Colorado had a bunch of chances, and I do like great defensive games, so it's not just the low scoring that made it boring. That rhymed. But I don't know. I also didn't want it to end. I kind of wanted it to go to like 5 overtimes. That would have sucked because I would have been up till like 3 a.m. But it was a weird game. It was exciting but boring, and I also didn't want it to end, but it did end. And I also kind of wanted Nashville to score, even though I wanted Colorado to win, just for the pure chaos of it all, because I love chaos. But they didn't. Cale Makar scored, and the Avs are up 2-0. But we have the Calgary Flames and the Dallas Stars. Calgary was first in the Pacific this year, and Dallas was 4th in the Central. They were fighting for their playoff lives down the stretch to keep the Golden Knights out of the playoffs. They managed to do that thanks to a little help from the San Jose Sharks and the Chicago Blackhawks. Funny enough, both of those teams beating the Vegas Golden Knights in a shootout to kind of destroy their playoff hopes and keep Dallas alive. Looking at the scores of that series, it is tied 1-1. Game 1 ended 1-0 in favor of Calgary. Game 2 ended 2-0 in favor of Dallas. Like I said, I haven't watched this one because it's been on at the same time as the Avs and Nashville. So if you have watched this and you are watching it on YouTube, please let me know in the comments. Has it been exciting to watch? If you aren't watching this on YouTube and listening to it wherever you listen to your podcasts, let me know on Twitter or Instagram or anywhere if you've been watching this series. Has it been exciting? Because, like I said, I like good defensive games. Low scoring doesn't bother me. I like watching defense. I like watching goalie duels. doesn't bother me. So if that's what this series is about, if the goaltenders are just playing out of their minds and the defense is great and scoring chances are happening, but great defensive plays are shutting them down or there's big saves, cool. Absolutely, totally exciting. I will have to look at the highlights and see what's going on. But seeing how both games were shutouts for different teams, 1-0 for Calgary in game 1, 2-0 for Dallas in game 2, I can't help but to think that this is one of the most mind-numbing, boring series to maybe not ever occur, because you have the years of the Trap Devils and all that, but at least the most boring series this year. And I haven't heard a lot about it on Twitter, so I'm kind of thinking that I may be correct, but at the same time, like, they are on at the same time as the Avs, and a lot of people are obviously talking about Colorado because, I mean, Nathan McKinnon, dude, he's ridiculous at hockey, just like Connor McDavid, and wow. That speed, that shot, that first goal last night, just absolutely sniped it. Just wow. So it's not surprising that more people are talking about Colorado than talking about Calgary and Dallas. But let me know if you've been watching that. Let me know how you've thought about it and if it's been exciting for you to watch or not. But rounding out the NHL playoff series, we go back over to the Eastern Conference, and I had to save this one for last because it is the one where my rooting interests lie, and that is the Toronto Maple Leafs, second in the Metro Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Tampa Bay Lightning, the third in the Metro. And that series is tied 1-1. Now, if you are on YouTube and you subscribe to this channel, you'll know that I am making videos for Toronto's playoff run, or if you haven't seen them pop up yet, there is a video for Game 1 and for Game 2, so you can go ahead and watch those if you are a Leafs fan, or if you just are interested in hearing what I have to say about them. If you are not watching on YouTube, again, you can go over there, youtube.com/c/FromCenterIce, and there are recap videos for Game 1 and Game 2. There will be one for Game 3. And Game 1, Toronto won 5-0, and I can tell you full certainty that I did not expect that to be the case at all. I didn't necessarily think that Tampa would come in and win game number 1. Not saying that. It was, I mean, I thought either team could have won, really. Toronto's really good this year. Obviously, Tampa is the 2-time reigning Cup champs. But it seemed like it could go either way, or it would be a close game. Both teams are very good, but this is the Maple Leafs in the playoffs we are talking about here. And nothing ever makes much sense. So they came out and they won 5-0. Jack Campbell with his second playoff shutout. He got one against the Montreal Canadiens last year. We don't talk about how that season went. Yeah, and Matthews and Mitchie Marner, they looked great in game number 1. They got criticized so harshly last season. And I mean, after all of their playoff runs, really, and how they can't win a series, they've been very criticized, but especially last year. And I mean, it was pretty warranted. They did not show up and have a good playoff series against the Montreal Canadiens, but it wasn't by any means all on them that they lost. It was a lot of dumb mistakes. But yeah, those two weren't great. But they came into this year's playoffs, and Austin Matthews looks like an absolute man possessed. He's strong on the forecheck out there. He's hitting people. He's playing defensively responsible hockey. He's setting up chances for his teammates. He's taking shots. He's scoring goals. I mean, this is the playoff Austin Matthews that you always want to see. He's just he's been fantastic, and his strong forechecking led to a goal in game number 2 as well for Michael Bunting, his first ever NHL playoff goal, and it was his first game back from not bad energy, but from being injured. So I don't think enough can really be said about how those two are playing in the playoffs so far, at least for Leafs fan or people interested in the Maple Leafs. I'm sure if you are not a Leafs fan at all, you are sick of hearing about Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, but if you listen to From Center Ice, you know that's what you are going to get here, because I am a Blackhawks fan, but also a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. And so I'm going to talk about the Leafs in the playoffs. But those two have been fantastic. Jack Campbell has also played very, very well for the Leafs. Of course, getting that shutout in game number 1. And while the Lightning did storm back in game number 2 and win that game 5-3, he had a few misplays. Goal number 1, he just kind of fell over while Hedman was all alone with him in front of the net, but he was left all alone. So I'm not blaming Jack for that. I said it in my recap video, he looked a little silly, but I'm not going to put the full blame on him for that one. And then I don't even remember what the second goal was now at this point, but I said maybe you want him to have that one too. Was that the breakaway goal by Corey Perry? It might have been. I don't know. But Jack has played really well. He came up with some massive saves in game 2 for the Leafs. Of course, Tampa scored 5 on him, but the Leafs wouldn't stop taking penalties, and everything that was called on them was genuinely a penalty. I saw a lot of people upset about the officiating. I didn't watch that game live because, like I said, I was at that IceHogs game on Wednesday, game 1. I'm going to the IceHogs game tonight when Toronto is also playing again. So I will be watching the Maple Leafs game tonight once I get back after I record my game 2 recap video for the IceHogs. But I saw a lot of people upset on Twitter about the officiating during that Leafs game. And watching it back, it's not on the officials for why the Leafs lost. They really need to play smarter. They need to be more disciplined. They got into penalty trouble in game 1 as well. They had to kill off that 5-minute major penalty to Kyle Clifford for boarding Ross Colton. But the penalty kill in game 1 really gave them momentum, and it looked great. I don't know that I've ever seen a better penalty kill ever in any game for any team. They looked really, really good, and they just could not keep that up for game 2. Not that they played poorly on the penalty kill, but as I said in my recap video for game 1, you can't keep putting this Tampa Bay Lightning team on the power play because they're not always going to be bad like they were in game 1. That is kind of where the Leafs got lucky there, is Tampa was just bad on the power play in game 1. They had a lot of bad passing. They weren't making the smart plays. And once this team wakes up on the power play, which Tampa did in game number 2, then they're going to make you pay for it, because you're not going to have very many games where Stamkos and Hedman and Kucherov and Point all go scoreless on the power play when you give them that many chances. So the Leafs ran into that in game number 2. For game 3, they really need to clean up those penalties. And that's basically the only complaint I have about their game, because even when they went down in that game number 2, whether it was being down 2-0, I think is how it started, or being down 3-1, 4-1, 5-1, the Leafs never quit on the game. They still kept pushing, kept trying to score goals. They were pushing the offense. There were times during the game where they completely controlled play and looked like the better team on the ice. They just couldn't stop taking those penalties, and that's what really came back to bite them. And so if they can clean that up, but keep playing their game otherwise and pushing the offense and being strong on the forecheck and on the back check, helping out Jack Campbell, clearing away rebounds, blocking shots, which they needed to do more of in game 2 as well, then the Leafs will be kind of okay. I'm not going to sit here and say they're going to win this series because I know maybe that's a hot take at this point, being as it, again, is the Leafs in the playoffs, especially the first round of the playoffs, and against the 2-time reigning Cup champs. So I'm not going to make any predictions. I'm not going to say if they clean that up, the Leafs are going to win the series. That's not what I'm sitting here saying. Don't worry, Leafs fans, I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is they're going to have a better chance at winning games if they do so. And, of course, Brandon Hagel got his first NHL playoff goal in Game 2 for the Lightning. And if you didn't watch my videos for Game number 1, I didn't realize until the day of that game, and I'm not sure why or how it took me so long to realize this, but with the Leafs playing the Lightning in round number 1, that means that they have to play one of my favorite players, Brandon Hagel, who, of course, the Blackhawks traded to Tampa Bay at the deadline, well, the Friday before the deadline, for 2 first-rounders and Taylor Radish and Boris Kachuk. And I'm still upset about it. And I can be upset about it because, yeah, I'm allowed to have feelings. And I get really tired of people telling me to not be upset about the trade. But I'm going to be upset about it because I just am. I don't care what we got in return. Like I said in the video about that trade, I understand it. Doesn't mean I'm happy about it, and that's totally fine. But of course, he would end up getting a goal against the Maple Leafs because that was just always going to be the case. And he's played really well in the series for Tampa so far, so I'm happy for him individually. I just can't root for him to win. He's also drawn a bunch of these penalties that the Leafs are taking, so that's also been frustrating. He drew the first penalty of the game, I want to say in game number 1 and in game number 2, and then he drew a second one in game 2 as well. I don't know if there were others, but those stuck out to me specifically. But I need to move on from talking about this series because there is more to cover, and we are sitting here at 42 minutes. I don't know what the exact run time for this podcast is yet, but at least the recording is 42, and it being a happy hour, I want this to last an hour. So that is all for the NHL playoffs currently. Obviously, there will be more games tonight and this weekend, but I must talk about the Blackhawks for just a few minutes. So the Men's World Championships are coming up, and 3 Blackhawks are going off to play for Team USA: Seth Jones, Caleb Jones, and Sam Lafferty. And they are also being joined by former Hawk Adam Gaudette, now of the Ottawa Senators. And speaking of Lafferty, he just signed a 2-year extension with the Blackhawks. Of course, the Hawks traded Alex Nylander, that's his name, to the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for Sam Lafferty this season, after trading away Henry Jokiharju to the Buffalo Sabres to get Alex Nylander, which just didn't work out. He played fairly well for the IceHogs to begin the season, but there was really no path to the NHL for him, so they traded him to Pittsburgh for Sam Lafferty. And at the time, everybody was like, huh? Why? Why this trade? Why does this make sense? But after Sam Lafferty came in and played some games for the Blackhawks, he really proved his worth to the team and the organization. He's hard on the plays, a hard-nosed player. He kind of has that Brandon Hagel work ethic without maybe the skill that Hagel has, but he's not some bum that's just hiding on the fourth line and is going to come out and grind out some shifts for you. He does have some scoring abilities to him as well, which was pretty impressive. He played 46 games for the Blackhawks this season. He scored 5 goals and 6 assists for 11 points and his 2-year extension has an AAV of $1.15 million. So it's not a bad contract. It's a short contract, and the money's not going to weigh down the Blackhawks at all. And like I said, he's proven to be a valuable player. He can kill some penalties for you. He can grind out those shifts. But he also started getting more and more offensive opportunities as the season wore on. So I'm excited to see, after a full offseason and a training camp with the Blackhawks, what kind of role he plays next season. Probably somewhat similar to the role he played this year, but it would be silly for any of us to go into next season thinking that this team is going to look exactly the same. So he'll likely have different line mates and maybe a bigger role, or maybe he will play further down the lineup in that grindy role that can chip in some offense here and there. Actually, while I'm on the topic of Sam Lafferty, I have to hop back up to Toronto for a second, because David Kampf is like killing it for the Leafs in the playoffs. He had a really productive season in the regular season for the Leafs as well. But in game number 1, when they won 5-0, he scored a shorthanded breakaway goal. And in period 1 of game 2, he had another partial breakaway. I don't believe it was shorthanded. It might have been. But he's a very solid player for the Maple Leafs. And I don't laugh at that because I think it's totally out of place. But he only scored 1 goal for the Blackhawks last season. And I know there was more to his game. He was a good player for the IceHogs when he was down there. And I appreciated him when he was on the Blackhawks for the role that he did play. He was a very solid defensive player, killing penalties, all that. I wanted to tell Leafs fans when they signed him in the offseason as a free agent that you're going to like this guy. He puts in a lot of work on the ice. He just might not score a lot of goals for you, and that's fine. You have freaking Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner and William Nylander and John Tavares, who's been MIA in the playoffs so far. You have all these guys who can score goals. You don't need David Kampf to score goals for you. But he decided he wanted to do that too anyway, so Kampf has been scoring for the Leafs, but he's also just been playing very well for the team, and I'm so happy for him. It's funny to me to see him being so productive and scoring that shorthanded breakaway. I probably celebrated more for that goal than I really needed to, seeing as they already had the lead. But I was just like, yeah, that's my Kampf. That's my former Blackhawks player. I'm so happy for you getting that shorthanded breakaway goal. You do that. But why couldn't you have scored more for the Blackhawks? Even though it didn't matter because they didn't go anywhere last year anyway. But I don't know, good for Kampf. But now we have Sam Lafferty, and while they're not the same type of player, it just made me think of that because they play further down the lineup and score some goals now, apparently. Lafferty for the Blackhawks and David Kampf for the Leafs. So there's that. But other than that, for the Blackhawks, they hired Jeff Greenberg as a second associate general manager. And according to their press release or news story on their website, he's going to be, quote unquote, overseeing strategic systems and processes that will fuel the entire hockey operations group. So whatever that means. He worked for the Chicago Cubs before, and he was in the talk to be named general manager for the Blackhawks while they were still doing their full search before promoting Kyle Davidson from interim GM to actual full-time GM. So they circled back around and hired him as an associate GM, so we'll see what he can do. Also in the front office or staff related topics for the Blackhawks, Mark Crawford and Rob Cookson are out as coaching staff, and they are still searching for a head coach for the team. Derek King is still being considered for that job, and that's about all we know on it so far. Yeah, we'll see where that goes. I certainly have my opinions on that, but we are running out of time and there's more to talk about, so I will talk more about the coaching when we have some more news about it, maybe just in a Blackhawks video. I'm working on a season recap video as well. It's just been kind of put a little bit more to the back burner with the playoffs for the IceHogs and the Maple Leafs. So there's that news. And in regards to the two big guys for the Hawks, Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, of course, Kyle Davidson said that he had really healthy exit interviews with them, and he's got an open door policy with them, and he wants their input going forward about where they see that the team can improve on and off the ice, and he wants to be honest with his players that they are in a rebuild now, and maybe it won't go as fast as some players would hope for. We heard that talking point a lot nearing the end of the season, once it was obvious that the Hawks weren't going anywhere, or more obvious, I should say. It was pretty obvious from the beginning of the season, but once they were officially mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, we heard more talk about the rebuild, and players were saying, you know, sometimes it goes faster than expected. We can rebuild this quickly and then get back to contending, but I really appreciate how Kyle Davidson kind of pumped the brakes on that talk and said that they want to be patient and they want to rebuild this franchise in the right way, which, you know, that's kind of also a talking point, winning the right way, rebuilding the right way. But he wants to really emphasize that point of being patient, and they're not looking to just do it quickly and get a quick fix. They want to develop prospects and really set this team in a good place to have sustained success going forward, instead of just trying to patch holes and have quick fixes. So obviously we haven't been able to see what Kyle's whole plan is yet. He was just named GM very recently, and, you know, doing that during the season and all of that is kind of difficult. We'll see what types of moves he makes at the draft or during free agency, sort of in the summer. It'll be a pretty quiet time for the Blackhawks up until then, I would assume, other than, you know, the IceHogs being in the playoffs. But as far as moves and stuff go, nothing typically happens until the draft. So we'll see. We'll see what his plan sort of starts looking like in the summer. But so far, I like what he's saying, because I think that's the good way to go about this rebuild, is developing the prospects, really using the IceHogs in that way, especially, again, with them being in the playoffs now. That is a great experience for these prospects and these rookies, and they're playing meaningful games. And we saw a lot of them make a good impact on the Blackhawks this year as well. Like Alec Regula, he played a bunch of games for them. He had a very solid first game for the IceHogs in the playoffs. Lucas Reichel got the first goal for the IceHogs in the playoffs. And while he may not have put up as many points in the NHL as people wanted to see this year, you could clearly see the talent on the ice. So Kyle being patient and not rushing these guys to the NHL and expecting them to be quick answers, I really like that plan, at least what he has said so far. And we just have to see how that really plays out if they stick to that plan, which he seems like he wants to. So that's all we can do, is trust that he is going to do that. So that's about it for the Blackhawks, which circles down to the AHL, because there are also playoffs going on down there, of course. But before we talk about the playoffs, hop down I-90 a bit, because Andrew Potterowski is the first skater since the 2009-2010 season to hit 100 points in the AHL. That's insane. Over a decade. And no player has hit 100 points until now. The captain of the Chicago Wolves, of course. He played 71 games for the Wolves this year, scoring 28 goals and 73 assists for 101 points. And going into the final game of the season against the Rockford IceHogs, he was sitting at 99, but he got 2 assists in that game, which pushed him over 100. So it always comes back around to the IceHogs and the Wolves. But the playoffs are a little bit different in the AHL. So all but the bottom 2 teams in each division make the postseason. So it's an expanded postseason. The first round is a best of 3 series. So if the IceHogs were to win tonight, they are done with Texas and they go on to face the Chicago Wolves. If they lose tonight, they play again tomorrow in game 3 if necessary. And if they win that one, obviously they are on to the next round as well. The division semifinals and the division finals are a best of 5 series. And then the conference finals and the Calder Cup final are a best of 7 series. And there's a few teams that have a first round bye. So the top teams in each division. So the Charlotte Checkers, who were first in the Atlantic, the Springfield Thunderbirds, who were second in the Atlantic, the Utica Comets, who were first in the North, the Syracuse Crunch, who were second in the North, the Laval Rocket, who were third in the North, the Chicago Wolves, first in the Central, Manitoba Moose, who were second in the Central, the Milwaukee Admirals, who were third in the Central, and the Stockton Heat, who was first in the Pacific. They all have first round byes, and most of them are awaiting opponents. Some of them already know who they are playing. Manitoba and Milwaukee will be playing each other, and I believe they start tonight, which is interesting in and of itself, but maybe they start tomorrow. I know Laval and Syracuse start tonight. Yes, Milwaukee and Manitoba do as well. So round 2 is starting before round 1 ends, Totally normal stuff here, but we also have some final results in AHL playoff series so far. So between the Providence Bruins and the Bridgeport Islanders, it has gone final. Bridgeport won the first 2 games, even though they were the 6th seed in the Atlantic and Providence was 3rd. So they are moving on to play the Charlotte Checkers. Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, and Hershey Bears start their series tonight, so they haven't played game 1 yet. For the Belleville Senators and the Rochester Americans, their series is 1-0 in favor of Rochester. Between the Ontario Reign and the San Diego Gulls, that one has also gone final. Ontario took the first 2 games. Game 1 at a score of 7-4. The second game went to overtime and they won 3-2. They are awaiting their second round competitor because they will be reseeding in the Pacific to see who plays who. Between the Colorado Eagles and the Henderson Silver Knights, that series is 1-0 in favor of the Colorado Eagles. They won game 1 5-2. So much like their big brothers there with the Avalanche, they are scoring a bunch of goals. Between the Bakersfield Condors and the Abbotsford Canucks, that has gone final as well. Bakersfield won both games. The first game was 2-1 in overtime. The second game was 3-2, so a pretty tight series, but they are also awaiting their second round competitor, seeing as they are in the Pacific and they need to reseed after the first round is done. And the final series is the Rockford IceHogs versus the Texas Stars. And the Rockford IceHogs took a 2-1 victory Wednesday night in game number 1 over the Texas Stars, and the team played so very well. Lucas Reichel got that first goal of the game, and Carson Gisevich got the second goal, game-winning goal. It came off of an Isaac Phillips shot, and it just tipped in off of Carson Gisevich, made it 2-1. And no, I'm sorry, that made it 2-0, and Texas scored right after that to make it 2-1. But the Piggies were able to hold on, get that 2-1 win. I was screaming so much. Of course, like I said, that's why my voice doesn't sound like maybe it usually does. It's getting a bit better. It was a lot more rough yesterday, but game 2 is tonight, so we will see what it sounds like after that. But it was a great game. The prospects looked so good. Arvid Soderblom was beyond solid in net. Again, Lucas Reichel looked really good. The bruising line of Captain Garrett Mitchell, Curtis Gabriel, and Dmitry Osipov was maybe the best line on the ice for the IceHogs, at least the most noticeable, maybe because they were throwing around their body so much, but they were also setting up plays offensively, and they weren't sacrificing any defense in order to throw their body around and hit Texas around a little bit. There were only 2 penalties called in that game. Both of them were in the first period, 1 to each team, and both teams killed off those penalties. So it was mostly played at even strength throughout the full game, which I thought was a lot of fun. There weren't that many unnecessary whistles. It was a fast-paced game. Both teams played well. I'd say that Rockford controlled the play, and they ended up winning. And it was a lot of fun. It was my first game back at the BMO since November, and they put on a good showing. So hopefully more of the same for that tonight. And we'll see how it goes. But before I wrap this up here, I will go over the schedule for the games this weekend. In the AHL for the playoffs, Friday night, so tonight, we have Rochester versus Belleville, Laval versus Syracuse, starting their second round series, Hershey versus Wilkes-Barre Scranton, Rockford versus Texas, of course. Milwaukee and Manitoba, like I said, are starting their second round series. Colorado and Henderson are playing game 2 tonight. And then Saturday night, if necessary, Rockford versus Texas. And also, if necessary, Colorado versus Henderson. Otherwise, we have Milwaukee and Manitoba playing their second game of round 2. So a good old back-to-back to kick off their series, as well as Laval and Syracuse playing game 2 of round number 2. Another good old back-to-back to start the series. On Sunday, we have Rochester and Belleville, if necessary, and Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, and Hershey playing game number 2 of their series. So there's possibly 2 AHL games on Sunday, otherwise there is just 1. So that's it for the AHL. For the NHL schedule in the playoffs, Friday night. Tonight, we have Carolina versus Boston, Toronto and Tampa Bay, Minnesota and St. Louis, Edmonton, and LA. So we'll see who comes ahead there. Saturday night, we have Florida and Washington, Colorado and Nashville, the Rangers and Pittsburgh. We'll see what happens with the goaltending there for the Penguins. And Calgary versus the Stars. Will there be another shutout in that series? That would be madness if all games go to a shutout, end up as a shutout for one of the teams. On Sunday, we have Carolina versus Boston, if necessary. No, I'm sorry, that would be the final game of the series if Carolina ends up sweeping Boston. I know. Sorry if you're a Bruins fan, but it's possible. They're up 2-0 right now. Minnesota and St. Louis, Toronto and Tampa Bay, and Edmonton and LA. So there are going to be some exciting games this weekend. I will be back Monday to talk about what happens over the weekend. We'll see if any of these series go final. We should have some final series scores and updates in the AHL as well. And I will go over any other NHL news and Blackhawks news that is flying around out there. So that is it for this first episode of From Center Ice Happy Hour. If you are drinking an alcoholic beverage, let me know what you are drinking. Again, I have an energy drink since I have to drive across town to the BMO tonight for the IceHogs game. But maybe next week, if there is no IceHogs game, I will join you in that for this happy hour. But all of that being said, let me know what you thought about this if you're watching on YouTube, or you can visit our social media pages on Twitter. It is at VF Center Ice Pod, on Instagram at From Center Ice Pod. So let me know. Follow us on all of the social medias. If you aren't watching this on YouTube, you can. youtube.com/c/FromCenterIce. But all of the links for all of that will be in the description for you as well to make it a little bit easier. So all of that being said, thank you guys so very much for tuning in. It was a lot of fun to go over these playoff series and do some researching into what's been going on. I hope you enjoy this happy hour, this brand new podcast episode. I know it's been a month or so since the last podcast episode, but here's another one. I hope you enjoy it, and I will catch you all in the next one. Bye, guys.